Goul du Pont Cave Incident. It was April 5, 2005. A diver named Waldeck arrived at Goul du Pont, the notorious cave in the Ardèche region of France. He wasn't just there as a mere explorer, he wanted to go deeper than ever before, deeper than anyone had gone in this cave. He had reached 336 feet in a previous dive 2 years earlier, but that record no longer satisfied him. There was something unfinished about this place. He needed to know what lay beyond. Waldeck had always been drawn to the deep, to the places most people feared to tread. Cave diving wasn't just a passion for him, it was a calling. He had spent years pushing the limits of his mind and body, venturing into the unknown, testing himself against the crushing pressure of the depths. But some places do not yield easily to human ambition. Some depths refuse to be conquered. As he prepared to descend, his equipment felt heavy, restrictive. His Buddy Inspiration rebreather strapped to his back, 2 gas cylinders clipped to his sides. In open water, the setup was manageable, but inside the tight, twisting tunnels of Goul du Pont, every extra inch of gear made movement harder, turning narrow passageways into suffocating choke points. Still, he felt ready. He had trained for this. He had done this before. When he slipped beneath the surface, the world above faded away. The only sounds were his own breathing and the gentle hum of his dive computer. At first, everything seemed to be going according to plan. The water was clear, visibility was good, and the tunnel stretched out ahead waiting for him. But then, at around 260 feet, the cave began to fight back. The deeper he went, the heavier his breathing became. At this depth, nitrogen in the gas mix he was inhaling started to act like a sedative, slowing his thoughts, dulling his reflexes. And then came narcosis. It crept up on him, making every decision feel just a little harder, every movement just a little slower. He had dealt with it before, but this time was different. Still, he pushed forward. By the time he reached 360 feet, he had broken his personal record. He had gone farther than he ever had. But triumph quickly turned to terror. The narcosis was worsening, his brain clouded, his body sluggish. The gas he was breathing was growing thicker under the pressure, making each inhale a struggle. His lungs fought against the weight of the water pressing in from all sides. It was as if the cave itself was trying to hold him there, refusing to let him go. He needed to turn back. He needed to escape, but his body wasn't responding the way it should have. His mind, hazy and oxygen-starved, wasn't making the right calculations. Instead of calmly switching to his emergency gas supply, he hesitated. He lingered just a moment too long. And in a place like this, a moment is all it takes. Hours passed. The dive team waiting on the surface knew something was wrong. Waldeck should have returned long ago. A rescue mission was launched. Divers descended into the cold, black water searching for their friend, and when they finally found him, he was at 344 feet facing the exit. It was clear he had tried to turn around. He had realized too late that he had to leave, but his body had already given up on him. His dive computer recorded a maximum depth of 351 feet, but he had never activated his emergency fail-safes. Maybe he had tried, but the narcosis had taken away his ability to think clearly. The rescue was grueling. Pulling him out of the cave was a battle against exhaustion, against the cold, against the overwhelming weight of tragedy. The men hauling him up through the tunnels were near hypothermia, their bodies pressed against icy rock, their minds tormented by the unknown. His body finally surfaced. On May 14, 2005, Waldeck was laid to rest in Warsaw. He had spent his life chasing the unknown, and in the end, it claimed him. Plura Cave Incident. It was February 6, 2014. 5 experienced divers set out to explore the freezing waters of Norway's Plura cave system, eager for the challenge and excitement that lay ahead. Kai Kankkanen, Patrick Granvist, Jari Hutanen, Vesa Rantanen, and Jari Yu had spent months preparing for this ambitious dive, a journey spanning over 6,600 feet from the cave's entrance in a remote pond to its exit at Steinugo Cave. The Plura Cave, the deepest in northern Europe, had long been a fascination for cave divers, with its twisting limestone-carved passages offering both beauty and peril. Beneath the frozen surface, where the water temperature hovered at a mere 2 degrees Celsius, even the most experienced divers could find themselves in a battle against the elements. The team had carefully divided into 2 groups. Patrick and Yachty H would lead the way, entering the cave first to minimize disturbances in the water. They cut a hole in the thick ice. their breath misting in the cold morning air as they worked. Soon, they descended into the silent depths, their underground scooters propelling them forward with quiet efficiency. 2 hours later, the second group, Kai, Vesa, and Yachty Yu, prepared to follow. As they adjusted their gear, unaware of what was unfolding below, Patrick and Yachty H navigated deeper into the cave, the dark waters swallowing them whole. At nearly 430 feet below the surface, Patrick signaled for Yachty H to take in the cave's grandeur. For Yachty, this was his first dive into Plura, and he marveled at the vast, eerie beauty surrounding them. But the moment of awe was short-lived. As they continued their ascent through a narrow, winding passage, Patrick suddenly realized he had lost sight of Yachty's light. He turned, scanning the darkness, until a frantic beam flickered erratically in the distance. Yachty was in trouble. Rushing back, Patrick found him struggling, his scooter wedged under a rock. Yachty yanked it free, but something was wrong. He signaled for help, asking for open-circuit bailout gas. Patrick handed it over, watching as Yachty took desperate gulps, switching between the new supply and his failing rebreather. The struggle intensified. Then suddenly Yachty stopped. His mouthpiece slipped away. Patrick's heart pounded as he tried to force a regulator into his friend's mouth, pressing the purge button to flood it with air. But it was too late. Yachty had drowned before his eyes. Panic clawed at Patrick's chest. He had seen death before, but never like this. Never a friend. Never in the claustrophobic grip of a cave with no easy escape. He clung to a rock, forcing himself to calm down. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. Yachty's lifeless body now blocked the narrow passage behind him, cutting off any chance of warning the others. There was no turning back. He had to push forward towards the exit, despite his dwindling oxygen supply. Meanwhile, the second group had begun their dive, unaware that a nightmare awaited them. Vesa, as meticulous as ever, had strapped 5 massive bailout cylinders to his body despite his friend's warning that they would hinder his movement. He insisted on the precaution. Kai, more pragmatic, agreed to carry one of them. As they descended deeper, they encountered their first challenge. Vesa became stuck in a narrow crevice, his oversized equipment trapping him. He fumbled with his gear, detaching cylinders and struggling to free himself. By the time he broke loose, precious minutes had slipped away, forcing him to extend his decompression time in the freezing water. Then, in the dim glow of their flashlights, they saw something unusual. It was Yachty H's lifeless body. Vesa squeezed past without looking, but Yachty Yu faltered, his breathing becoming erratic. A rising panic overtook him. In an instant, he switched to his bailout system, but something went terribly wrong. His body jerked, and before Kai could react, Yachty Yu was already gone. Kai's mind screamed at him to do something, but there was nothing left to be done. One friend already lost, another one now drifting lifelessly beside him. He turned to Vesa, who was violently kicking past Yachty H's body, desperate to move forward. Kai shouted, telling him that Yachty Yu was also dead. They should turn back. But Vesa didn't stop. He knew that retracing their path would take too long. It was either push forward or risk meeting the same fate. Kai hesitated for a moment before making a decision. He decided to turn back alone. He couldn't bear to watch another friend die. Vesa continued forward, but he was already exhausted, his heavy equipment slowing him down. Patrick, somewhere ahead, was battling his own fight for survival, unaware of what had unfolded behind him. Kai's journey back to the pond was nothing short of a nightmare. His air was running low. He had to abandon some decompression stops, choosing the risk of decompression sickness over the certainty of suffocation. He swam desperately, trying to keep his body warm in the freezing water. By the time he reached the air chamber just 98 feet from the entrance, he was almost out of air. He considered staying there, breathing the trapped air to conserve his supply, but he knew no one was coming to rescue him. He had to push on. His scooter failed. Fatigue weighed heavily on his muscles. Every kick felt like a battle. What should have taken 15 minutes now dragged on for 45. And then, finally, the faint shimmer of light above. He could finally see the exit. He punched through the thin layer of ice that had reformed over their entry hole and emerged, gasping. But the pond was empty. No one was there. It was 1:30 a.m. He had been underwater for nearly 12 hours. At the other entrance, Patrick and Vesa also surfaced, though hours apart. Both were battered, freezing, and utterly drained. Vesa, in particular, was feeling the effects of decompression sickness, his body aching from the ordeal. When they finally made contact with the outside world, the truth settled over them like a weight too heavy to bear. 2 of their friends were dead, and their bodies remained trapped in the cave. Norwegian authorities deemed the cave too dangerous for recovery operations. Experts from around the world attempted to retrieve the bodies, but the risk was too great. The cave was sealed, their friends left behind, but Patrick, Kai, and Bessa refused to accept it. They owed it to their fallen teammates. They knew the cave better than anyone else. If no one else would bring them home, they would. And so, despite the official ban, they began planning. Patrick reached out to fellow divers, sending messages in hushed secrecy. The world had already heard about the tragedy. What they didn't yet know was that the survivors weren't done with Plura Cave just yet. Poganica Cave Incident. It was September 2002. A 31-year-old Czech diver, Miroslav Kukliš, also known as MK, embarked on a night dive into the bay of Poganica Cave, a site known among locals for its treacherous underwater labyrinths. Equipped with a 15-liter air cylinder and a dive computer, MK descended into the cave's depths around 9:15 p.m., unaware of the danger that awaited him. The cave's entrance, a narrow funnel approximately 2 meters wide, led him down to about 9 meters below the surface before branching into 2 distinct passages, a shallow gallery and a deeper, more perilous route descending to approximately 57 meters. Opting for the deeper path, MK ventured further into the cave. However, the fine silt lining the cave's interior, easily disturbed by movement, quickly reduced visibility to near zero, creating a disorienting environment even for experienced divers. MK pushed forward through the dark, twisting cave, searching for the exit. The water was thick with silt, clouding his vision, but he was certain he had found the exit. He surged ahead, only to realize too late that he had ventured deeper into the cave's complex network. As MK navigated the cave, he mistook the entrance to the shallow gallery for the exit due to the murky conditions. This critical error led him deeper into the cave's complex network. To make things worse, MK had consumed alcohol prior to the dive. Intoxication, along with potential nitrogen narcosis, a condition affecting divers at depth, impaired his judgment and motor skills. When MK failed to resurface, his companions initiated a search but were unsuccessful. The following morning, 2 police divers were dispatched to locate him. Tragically, one of the police divers also became lost and drowned within the cave's confines. Subsequent recovery efforts led to the retrieval of both bodies. MK was found at a depth of 54.1 meters, lying on his back with a diving knife protruding from his chest. His mask was off and his regulator was out of his mouth, indicating a desperate struggle in his final moments. Initially, authorities suspected foul play, arresting 2 individuals. However, a thorough forensic investigation, including analysis of MK's dive computer and the cave's layout, concluded that as MK ran out of air and faced the imminent threat of drowning, he chose to end his life by stabbing himself to avoid the prolonged suffering associated with drowning. This case is considered one of the first documented instances of suicide during a dive. Judean Cave Incident. 2 best friends, Wang Tao and Wang Yang, had been diving in the Judean Cave since 2010. These caves were located in the breathtaking hills and rivers of Duanjiangshui, China. From their very first descent, the 2 divers were captivated by the cave's beauty. The cave was a maze of twisting passages and sharp drops, each turn leading deeper into the unknown. Over the years, they returned again and again, pushing their limits, exploring deeper each time. By 2014, their experience had grown and they felt ready to take on their biggest challenge yet. They planned to dive 170 meters. This was risky, but Wang Tao and Wang Yang were confident. They had trained for this, or so they thought. On May 13, 2014, the 2 arrived at the cave's north entrance. The plan was simple: descend carefully, mark their path, and ascend following a strict decompression schedule. At first, everything went smoothly. They descended through the dark, silent waters, navigating steep drops and narrow passages. At 164 meters, Wang Tao placed a marker on the line to track their progress. But as they ascended to 130 meters, they suddenly realized their guideline was gone. In the darkness of the cave, losing the line was terrifying. Without it, there was no way to find the way out. Panic set in. They fumbled in the darkness, searching desperately. After what felt like an eternity, they finally found the line again. Their relief was overwhelming, but they knew they had lost precious time. At 120 meters, Wang Yang saw Wang Tao signaling. He was running out of gas. The realization stung him. Wang Yang immediately handed him a regulator and they began sharing air. Their only option was to ascend, fast but not too fast. They held onto the guideline, moving upwards with measured breaths. If they panicked now, if they made any mistakes, it could cost them their lives. Then, just 15 meters from their decompression bottles, everything fell apart. Wang Yang turned and saw Wang Tao floating away, his body rising uncontrollably. Wang Yang reached out, but in a split second, Wang Tao was gone. The long hose that connected them slipped from his hands. For a few painful moments, he waited for some sign of movement, anything to show that Wang Tao was still fighting. But there was nothing. Heart pounding, Wang Yang grabbed onto the long hose and followed the guideline upwards, searching. He pushed himself deeper into the cave, hoping to find his friend, but the cave was vast and the visibility was poor. He was losing time. His own air was running low. He had to make a decision. With every breath, his body grew weaker. At 75 meters, he found one of the decompression bottles and switched to it, but the cave no longer felt familiar. He was alone. Still, he refused to give up. He descended again, hoping against hope that he would find Wang Tao, but his mind was beginning to fail him. The exhaustion, the stress, it was all catching up. At 90 meters, his thoughts became jumbled and his vision blurred. His body was screaming for air. Survival instinct took over. Wang Yang had no choice but to ascend. He grabbed onto another gas bottle and started climbing. He ignored the decompression stops. His only thought was to get out. Then, at 21 meters, the world started spinning. He grabbed onto a rock, trying to steady himself. He knew the symptoms. He had ascended too fast. He was experiencing decompression sickness. Then, through the haze, he saw someone. It was Jupiter. The two divers had luckily posted a support diver Jupiter at the mouth of the cave. Wang Yang signaled to him that Wang Tao was gone. Jupiter's eyes widened in shock, and without hesitation, he dove back down to search. Wang Yang stayed put, clinging to the rock, his mind struggling to stay clear. Then, suddenly a wave of dizziness hit. The cave walls spun around him. He felt like he was floating away from his own body. He signaled to Jupiter that he needed to ascend. The journey to the surface was painful. His body was shutting down. He vomited from nausea, suspecting oxygen toxicity. Then, the convulsions started. His muscles seized, his breath caught in his throat. Every second felt like a battle just to stay conscious. He clung to Jupiter, knowing he wouldn't make it on his own. He had never felt so weak, so vulnerable. His dry suit had lost insulation and the cold was creeping into his bones. His arms ached, his body refused to move the way he wanted it to, but he forced himself to keep going. Slowly, painfully, he completed the last of his decompression stops. When they finally surfaced, Wang Yang was barely able to stand. His gear was removed by bystanders as Jupiter called for help. A French dive team in the area was contacted to search for Wang Tao, but they would have to wait until the next day. There wasn't enough time to prepare for a dive that night. On April 19th, the French dive team descended into the cave. After many hours of the search, they finally found him. Wang Tao's body was resting in a horizontal passage 51 meters deep. It appeared that the current had carried him there, and stress, rapid breathing, carbon dioxide buildup, and nitrogen narcosis had caused his death. They recovered his remains along with the equipment he had carried on that fateful dive. The following day, Wang Tao was cremated in Nanning. Friends and family gathered to say their goodbyes, laying flowers and offering prayers. For Wang Yang, the loss was devastating. He had entered that cave with his closest friend, but only one of them had come back. Agen Allwedd incident. Roger Solari had always been drawn to cave diving. It was more than just a hobby for him, it was a passion. In May 1974, he made an exciting discovery deep within Agen Allwedd in South Wales. The first two sumps, measuring just 249 feet and 82 feet each, were short enough for Roger to navigate with ease. However, the third sump stretched much farther into the unknown, and its full length was still a mystery. At this point, even another diver, John Parker, had stopped his exploration. Exploring this untouched third sump was the kind of discovery that cave divers dream of, but he didn't have enough air in his tanks to continue that day, so he turned back, promising himself he would return. A month later, on June 15, 1974, Roger set out to continue the exploration. This time he was accompanied by his friend Martin Farr. They were well prepared, each carrying 3 air cylinders, boots, and a line reel to mark their path. The dive went smoothly at first. Roger led the way, laying down his 400-foot guideline while Martin followed, carrying a much longer 1,000-foot reel. As they progressed, Roger signaled that he was having trouble with his sinuses. It wasn't the first time he had experienced this kind of difficulty while diving, so he pushed through. Martin suggested that he turn back when the discomfort didn't go away, but Roger was determined to continue. Their dive plan allowed for independent decisions. Either of them could return whenever they felt the need. At around 400 feet in, Roger's guideline ran out. They were at a depth of about 50 to 60 feet, and the passage continued sloping downward. Martin checked his pressure gauge and saw he was nearing his first third limit of air, but decided to continue a little further. He knew Roger had a little less air than he did. They communicated underwater, agreeing that Martin would carry on while Roger turned back. Martin swam deeper into the passage. About 150 feet later, he spotted a steep gravel bank leading upward. Hoping to find an air pocket where he could catch his breath, he ascended. But when he reached the top, he realized there was no airspace. His air supply was now critically low. Knowing he had to get out immediately, he turned and began making his way back. As he moved, he saw Roger near the roof of the passage, about 3 feet from the surface. Martin signaled that it was time to leave. Roger grabbed onto his guideline, and Martin dropped his reel to move faster. Both of them were dangerously low on air. Martin reached the deepest part of the passage before ascending. The rapid change in pressure caused intense pain in his ears, forcing him to stop for a moment. He cleared his ears and waited on the line for Roger to appear, but Roger wasn't there. Martin couldn't afford to wait any longer. His air was running out, and if he went back to search for Roger, he risked getting stuck himself. He made the difficult decision to continue to the surface. When he finally emerged, he expected Roger to follow shortly after, but as time passed, it became clear that something was wrong. Martin was increasingly uneasy but had no air left to return. He called a rescue team, which included the experienced cave diver John Parker. The divers attempted to locate Roger. It was a rough day and heavy rainfall had worsened visibility, making the conditions extremely dangerous. Despite their efforts, they couldn't find him. They did, however, notice something unusual. Roger's guideline had been cut about 30 feet beyond where the reels had been joined. No one knows exactly what happened. Some believe Roger may have become tangled and cut himself free. Others think he might have lost his way in the murky water. His body was never recovered, and the circumstances of his disappearance remain a mystery. Eagle's Nest Cave Incident. Eagle's Nest Cave is one of the world's most dangerous underwater cave systems. It is located in the Chassahowitzka Wildlife Management Area in west-central Florida and has a fearsome reputation among divers. Those who enter must have expert-level training, extensive experience, and a deep understanding of its complex tunnels. Even the most skilled divers hesitate before venturing into its depths, knowing that many who entered before never made it out alive. Yet on June 12, 2004, two experienced divers, John Robinson and Craig Simon, took the risk. John had been planning this dive for some time, but when the day arrived, no one else was willing to accompany him. This was because the dangers were too great. Only Craig agreed, despite his wife's strong objections. He had made countless dives before. Why would this one be any different, he had thought. As they prepared their gear on the edge of the sinkhole, the water looked uninviting. Unlike the crystal-clear springs of nearby Beaufort Springs or Weeki Wachee, Eagle's Nest was murky and swamp-like, buzzing with mosquitoes and surrounded by thick vegetation. But beneath the surface lay an entirely different world. A vast, breathtaking cave system that few had the skill or courage to explore. The two divers meticulously planned their dive. Using a special gas mixture, they had enough air for 2.5 hours in the cave. Their goal was to reach 1,800 feet inside at a maximum depth of 300 feet, spending no more than 40 minutes on their descent and ascent, including decompression stops. At 1 p.m., they slipped beneath the surface and descended through a narrow hourglass-shaped passage leading to the ballroom, which is a massive chamber 150 feet wide. From there, they entered the downstream tunnel, a passage that gradually dropped to 200 feet before taking a sharp plunge down a pit to 290 feet. Beyond this, the cave opened into large rooms and winding passages, a hidden realm few had seen. Everything seemed to be going as planned until it wasn't. Hours passed and John and Craig never resurfaced. Their absence triggered immediate concern. Something had gone terribly wrong. Paul Heinerth, an experienced cave diver, was called in to search for them. Entering Eagle's Nest, he moved carefully but urgently, following the same path his friends had taken. Deep in the cave, he reached John's pocket, a cramped and eerie section of the tunnels. There, his flashlight caught sight of something, a diving scooter half buried in the silt. Nearby lay John Robinson's body. His equipment was still functional, but his air tanks were empty. His body position suggested he had been trying to escape. The silt covering the cave floor indicated he had likely kicked it up, disorienting himself in the blinding cloud of debris. In the labyrinth of Eagle's Nest, losing visibility even for a moment can be fatal. Unfortunately, Craig was nowhere to be found. Rescue divers scoured the area but found no sign of Craig. The two men had separated, something that rarely happens in cave diving unless there's a serious emergency. Had Craig gotten lost in another part of the cave? Had he tried to escape through a different route? No one knows. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And if you enjoyed this video, check out our other videos too.